Hi there, this is Dana. In this tutorial, I'm actually going to be walking you I'll explain in a minute, through a project about how to stitch this Vote hand embroidery pattern. I'm going to be teaching you how to do back stitch for this. There are a few other stitches involved and a few other techniques, and what I'm actually going to be doing is linking those below, and that way you can just watch this tutorial. If you're already a little bit familiar with hand embroidery, you can just follow this one tutorial and you'll be off to the races. If you're not super familiar with hand embroidery, you can watch the other ones and get a bit more detail. And also I do teach a hand embroidery fundamentals class on Skillshare. I'll put a link to that below as well, and that'll teach you all the basics you need to know in a lot more detail, and you'll actually learn how to do this little floral monogram hoop in that tutorial, which is super cute. So yeah, so you can either take the class, in this one here, you'll learn how to do backstitch, which is what I'm going to be using in this pattern here, or you can just follow along with this one and then do the other tutorials as needed. So what you're going to need for material, obviously you're going to need some fabric. I'm using Zweigart, it's a German manufacturer's Kingston linen. It's super pretty. But you can use quilting cotton, you can use anything that you happen to have. You can do this onto a tote bag, whatever, because I'm pretty sure by now we all realize how important good leadership is, particularly when dealing with a global pandemic. So this pattern, I'm doing it in a bunch of really pretty colors here. So these are all DMC, which is a floss manufacturer. So I've got 3804, I've got 340, and I've got 208. So you can do any colors you want for this. Obviously you can use like your country's national colors or whatever floats your boat. If it's onto dark fabric, doing this in white would look really pretty. But for now I'm using these colors. So you're going to need your colors, you're going to need your fabric. For this project I'm going to be doing it in a little 4-inch hoop. Got your pattern printed out, so this is included in the links below as well. And I'll explain what this part of the pattern is for in a moment. So this is the part that you would trace. If you're not sure about tracing your fabric, one of the links below will be about more details about how to transfer this pattern onto your fabric. What I did for this is I actually traced it up against a window using the friction pens. These things are fantastic. There go friction, because these can actually erase with heat, so you can either iron it or blast it with a hairdryer. But one thing to notice with these is if your piece gets cold again, the lines can come back, so you might want to wash your piece afterwards just to prevent that from happening. And by cold I mean if it ends up in the post or in the hold of an airplane, things like that. If it gets cold enough, the lines can reappear and then not be erasable. And I've got my 4-inch hoop, and obviously you'll be needing needles. So I'm going to be using a number 6 embroidery needle. It's just like a medium-sized one, and these are actual embroidery needles, not tapestry needles. If you're a cross-stitcher, tapestry needles are blunt. These are very sharp, so be aware of that when you're using them. They are quite sharp. Alright, so first up, once you've traced your design onto your fabric, and you can also do this by hand. Like if you don't want to trace the pattern, you can totally do this by hand. You can blow this up to any size you want. If you want to make it banner size, go for it. Fill your boots. I wouldn't recommend doing banner size for your first one, though. I would definitely recommend practicing on a smaller one. So you can see here, I've got my hoop, and I've let the tension off of the hoop slightly. Do this, bam. So you put the solid one on the bottom and then the one with the bolt on the top, and you just tighten it up a little bit. Alright, so this pattern features backstitch, and the little dots on here, you can see when I trace the pattern, I didn't actually just trace like the full size of the circle, I just put a dot on the fabric. That's fine. You can use other pens as well. You can use a pencil or like even a regular writing pen, but if you do that, then you are going to have to make sure that your stitching covers those lines perfectly. You can see when I traced it, it went a little bit wobbly, but that's okay because this one's erasable. So I'm going to be teaching you how to do the back stitch, which is going to be around the outside edges of the letters and also some of the detailing. So on here you can see I've got the color number, so 3804, which is this bright pink. That's going to use for the back stitch, using 3 strands, the back stitch and the letter outlines. So that's those. The 340 is pretty purple. 2 strands of these, and that's going to be for the French knots, which are the little dots. Again, there's going to be a tutorial linked below for French knots if you don't know how to do them. And it also includes a tutorial for colonial knots. Some people find those ones easier. And 208, 2 strands again, and that's going to be the line details in the center of the letters and these little spraying out ones here. All right, so it's mentioned 2 strands and 3 strands. Your embroidery floss, if you've never used it before, it actually has 6 strands. So what I've done is I've pre-cut a piece of floss here that I'm going to be using and put a knot in it already. You can just use a simple knot. Some people freak out about knots. It's fine. Don't worry. Don't panic. So I've separated it out into 3 strands. This is about the length of the distance from my tips of my fingers to my elbow. So I split the 6-strand floss into half, into 3 strands, so that's what I'm going to be using. Because that's way it's a little bit easier for you to see the stitches. So I've got my floss threaded. Again, if you don't know how to thread your floss, there are needle threaders and things like that. I have another tutorial on my website. If you go to peacockandfig.com and search for needle threaders, you'll see a whole tutorial on different types of needle threaders and then how I actually thread my floss by hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top of this V crossbar here. I'm going to start right here. I'm going to come up. You'll see why it's called backstitch in a minute. So I'm going forward about 1/4 inch, 1/2 centimeter-ish. You can do shorter or longer ones. I'm just doing slightly longer ones for this one just for teaching purposes. So this one you're coming up and then going down towards you. But then this one you're going to be coming in ahead of it. I'm just going to make sure that's zoomed in. And then going back into the same hole that your stitch just came up, which is why it's called backstitch. So this is pretty much it. So then again, you're going to go up ahead and then drop down that last hole. So you can see here, I've got enough space for roughly 2 more stitches between here and the base of the V, so you can just eyeball it to be roughly half, so your stitches are about an even length. You don't want your stitches to be like crazy uneven lengths, like some super short and some super long, but that can be a neat effect if you do it intentionally. All right, and then down to the base. Bam. Easy. So then this one, because we're wanting to go up the other side, you're going to again come up over here and drop it down, and you just keep on trucking. So right here where you can see where this line meets this one, it's not a terrible idea to actually have that be the end of a stitch there, because then this stitch, when it comes down, can drop back down into that same hole. It's not mandatory at all. It's just if you have the opportunity to kind of match up your stitches like that, then it just makes it look just a tiny little bit neater. And again, if you're stitching this onto, say, a tote bag or a t-shirt or something like that, for beginners, I would not recommend using a stretchy fabric. You can do that later, but for now I would not recommend doing stretchy. So you can see this stitch here end up a little bit wonky. You can either unpick it and just take the needle off the thread and unpick it and then just do that stitch again, or you can just keep going like I'm going to do, because it's meant to look handmade. Do not stress about things looking a little wobbly, whatever. That's another advantage too to using a few more strands. The more strands you use on your stitches, the less wobbly your stitches are going to look. So you can see I've finished up there. So for this one I could either do 1 longer bar or I could do 2 shorter bars. I'm going to do 1 longer bar. Bam! Done. So you can see this fabric I'm using is actually, I don't know if you can quite see it in the video, but it's a little bit translucent, meaning like the threads crossing the back will be visible. So what I'm going to do for this one, and if you have like normal quilting cotton or something like that where you can't see the threads crossing the back from the front, don't even worry about this. Like, this isn't something to really worry about, but just because this fabric is quite translucent, I'm going to show you a trick that you can travel without crossing the back. So you can see you've got your line of stitching here. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm actually going to wind my stitching back just to roughly where this one is here, coming out here. Alright, and because I don't want to travel across the back, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start in this hole here and then carry on and then do the back stitch again. So embroidery is very meditative. It's very, very peaceful to do until you get a knot, and then it's not so peaceful. But that's okay. Enjoy the process. Nobody's expecting you to be perfect. So again, I could do this in 2 shorter ones. I'm going to choose to do 1 longer one. It's just a stylistic choice. If this is going to be something that's worn, I would tend to use slightly shorter stitches because that way it's not going to get caught on things. But if it's like a decorative thing, then you can do longer ones like that. And there's your V. So because I don't want to carry the threads across to the back for this one, I am going to tie off. So to tie off, I'm going under and under again, and then just making a little, catching my thread, little knot. It doesn't have to be like crazy tight, like you don't want to pull your stitches tight from the front too much. There we go. And I'm just going to weave my ends through a little bit and then snip them. Shabam! And you can snip those ends a little bit too if you like. Alright, so that's how you do the back stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going with the rest of the back stitch for the outline of the letters, and then I will come back to you and I'll show you what that looks like. You don't have to do these decorative parts at all. If you don't want to, you can just do the outline. Totally cool. I designed this so you can do as much or as little as you like. So I'll be back in a moment and I'll show you what this looks like fully stitched up with the back stitch. Alright, so we're done now. You can see that I've finished doing all of the back stitching here. And zoom in right here, you go. So if anybody ever tells you that the back of your hand embroidery or your cross stitch is supposed to look the same at the front, first step is to smack them. And second is just to tell them, no, that's not true. That's a thing that sort of came about during the Victorian era. It's not a thing. Like, unless you're using organza or something like completely transparent, like one of the classes I teach on Skillshare actually teaches how to do that kind of floating hoop effect by stitching onto organza, and I teach you how to make it so that it looks the same from the front and the back. Other than that, don't even worry about it. It's not a thing. It's okay if it looks handmade. That's the point. Anyhow, mini rant over against the people who want to suck all the fun out of it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to continue on with the French knots and with all the little extra back stitch details around here. So as you can see by the pattern here, so the French knots are, I've designated as DMC 340, which is this pretty lavender pattern color here, and 2 strands of that, and then the other detail lines, the line details, so all these little splay outy bits, the ones in between the O and the E, I'm doing those in this pretty violet color, 208. So again, you can choose any colors you want, any amount of strands you want, or just not stitch them at all. You could leave it like that and be done. You'd be good. So again, I'm going to put links in the below for the French knot tutorial. The back stitch is obviously going to be exactly the same as what I just showed you, and then I'll come back and show you what this looks like in the end. Alright, so we're back, and you can see I've finished it all up here. I've done all of the back stitch lines, all of the little French knots and whatnot. Again, you can adapt this to whatever you want to do. This is your project. You can add embellishments, take embellishments away, make it bigger, smaller, whatever floats your boat. If you did want to keep this in a hoop and display it and protect the back of it with a felt like I've done here, again, I'll put another tutorial link in the below, and that way you can access that and figure out how to finish off the back. I'd love to see your projects when you finish stitching these up. You can tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Peacock and Fig. If you want to access some free patterns, I'll put a link to that below as well. I've got free cross-stitch and embroidery patterns on my site, as well as like a ton of other tutorials, as well as of course the full Skillshare classes that come with free patterns as well. And I'd love to give a big shout out to Peggy Dean of the Pigeon Letters. She was the one who I collaborated with for this project. We kind of brainstormed this together, so she's amazing. Go follow her in all the places, go buy all the things from her. She's awesome and hilarious. So I really hope you enjoyed this project. And happy stitching!